understand. Amen.
Well, I know what many of you are wondering this morning. You're wondering, could I come up with a joke that's spooky enough for Halloween, still appropriate for church, and also related to Ecclesiastes? I can. Why did the Headless Horseman get a job? Because he was trying to get ahead in life. We'll come back to that idea, but last week I introduced to us the book of Ecclesiastes, and I introduced it as a book that examines kind of the exceptions to the rule in wisdom literature. Specifically, it kind of examines the times when the book of Proverbs tells us things that don't always hold true. I call these statements in Proverbs truisms. But I came across an explanation this week that was helpful for me, so I thought maybe it'd be helpful for some of you as well. So I'll share that as we prepare to get into chapters 1 and 2 of Ecclesiastes. It's the difference between something being complicated and something being complex. Now, the dictionary definition of these two words are essentially the same, but in some fields of study, there's a definitive difference between them. So I'm using definitions for them that I found in an article written by someone at MIT. I shared this with Kayleen, and she thinks these definitions should be switched, and like I said, in the dictionary, they're kind of interchangeable. So if this makes more sense to you the other way around, switch the words. That's not the important part. The concepts are what we're trying to get for here. But like I said, I'll use these definitions from MIT. If something is complicated, there are a lot of detailed instructions for it, and it has a set order, and it's repeatable. For instance, I put together Legos, and one of my crowning Lego achievements is the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. It's over 5,000 pieces, and it took me weeks to put together. And we're not talking when I was a kid, it took me weeks. I was an adult, and it still took me weeks to put this thing together. Some of you who've come to my house, I've taken you downstairs into the storage room to show it to you. But this morning I didn't bring the whole thing. I brought the instruction book for that. This thing is 300 pages. That is complicated. It has a lot of detailed instructions, but complicated things, when you follow the detailed instructions, turn out the way they're supposed to. By following these instructions, I was able to put 5,000 individual Lego pieces together into a model of the Millennium Falcon. And it looks just like the picture, but bigger. And you know what? If I ever took it apart, which would be a project in itself, I could use these same instructions and put it back together the same way. It would turn out the same. Things that are complex, on the other hand, don't follow a set order. They don't work with predictable results. An example of this is raising children. You can read all the books that you want and follow all the instructions, but no two children will turn out the same way. As an example, I have this book. It's called Resilient: Child Discipleship and the Fearless Future of the Church. I've read this book. I try to apply the teachings of this book. But if I raise Caleb based on these principles and I raise a different kid on the same principles, we'll get two different adults. They won't be the same. That's complex. There's a complexity in it that makes it impossible to guarantee the correct results, even though following things will make it more likely that you get a favorable outcome. The difference is I could build a Lego set 100 times and have the same thing every time, but I can't raise two children to be the same adult. Proverbs, then, in this definition, are complicated. They give you instructions that have predictable results. At least they're presented that way. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4 says, "The one who is lazy becomes poor, but the one who works diligently becomes rich." It's presented as a set order and a predictable result. This is why the Headless Horseman got a job, because if he worked diligently, he could get rich and get ahead in life. Ecclesiastes, though, will look at the same issue and make it complex. It will present the case that riches aren't always the result of your diligent work. All of this is wisdom, and we get wisdom by reading the Bible books like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes specifically, but we also get it from experience. You've probably heard that you should learn from your mistakes. That's a great way to gain wisdom, is learning from your mistakes. But I like to say that we should learn from the mistakes of others, because you'll never live long enough to make all the mistakes yourself. In Ecclesiastes chapters 1 and 2, which we'll look at this morning, we'll have the opportunity to learn from some of Solomon's mistakes. Life may be more complex and more complicated than what we're able to work through on our own. But Solomon was one of the wisest people to ever live, and he had some experiences that we can get a glimpse into and see some of his thinking. And we'll get that beginning in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We'll start with verses 1 through 11. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All the streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they will flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. There is a thing of which it is said, see, this is new. It has already been in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. You see, the author of Ecclesiastes begins by writing from the perspective of Solomon, whose wisdom, riches, and power allowed him to experience things that most of us can't on our own. In these beginning 11 verses, we see one of the major themes of the book, that all is vanity. If you remember from last week, the word that we translate as vanity is essentially a vapor. And in these verses, it's as if our lives are seen as a vapor or as a breath. Generations come and go, but the earth remains. The earth is almost pictured as solid and constant, as opposed to human lives that are brief and transitory, like a vapor or a breath. Even in the constant change we see on earth, there's a concreteness to it. The wind blows all different directions, but it never runs out, and it will blow in those same directions again. Rivers run to the sea, but the water always returns and continues on a constant travel toward the sea once again. And even in our greatest efforts, humans can't change much of the course of these things. We build dams or we plant trees to break the wind, but ultimately water and wind continue on their courses as they have always been. We are like a vapor on this earth. We live short lives compared to the history of the earth, and we make little, if any, impact on the earth under the sun. Most of us will never even be remembered beyond a few generations. We may have our names recorded in some long genealogy, but no one will remember anything of substance about us. And even the work that we do is often cyclical. Just as the water flows to the sea and then is taken up into the clouds and returns as rain or snow, only to flow to the sea once again, our work is seemingly never ending. At my house, I often load the dishwasher, and then I unload the dishwasher, and then a day or two later, I load the dishwasher again, and then I unload the dishwasher, and there's never any end to the dirtying and cleaning of dishes. There's never any end to the dirtying and cleaning of laundry. There's often a pause in that process as the laundry waits to be folded or put away. At least there is in my house. But the cycle of it never ends. Now that might be a little trivial. Maybe the never-ending cycle of planting and harvesting is more meaningful to you. That cycle never ends. And there's little significant gain or profit in the process. Even for what we would consider a profitable farm operation, the profits are insignificant from an eternal perspective. We can't take those profits with us, and even in terms of the long life of the earth, The profits of a farmer who lives out the cycle of planting and harvesting time and time again are insignificant. They don't amount to much more than a hill of beans in the grand scheme of things. All that considered, there's a weariness to all of these cycles, isn't there? Doing the same work over and over with no end in sight. It's unrelenting and it's tiring. And when we don't see any meaningful profit from it, when things seem the same week after week and year after year with no end in sight, it can wear us down. And if that's not depressing enough, let's keep reading. The next few paragraphs we'll search for, and I will add, fail to find meaning in wisdom, in pleasure, and in work. Picking up in verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom, or search out by wisdom, all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. We'll come back to this pursuit of wisdom and the value or lack of value in that pursuit in a few more paragraphs, but from just this section, there's a couple of quick points to make. In a book that we consider wisdom literature, we're told by perhaps the most qualified of people, Solomon, that wisdom isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Solomon was particularly qualified to be a case study in the pursuit of wisdom, and in that pursuit we can see both sides of his venture. He experienced both wisdom and folly, and in each case he found them to be nothing more than a striving after wind. And beyond that, this paragraph concludes with perhaps one of the most discouraging statements in the whole book. In much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Have you ever experienced that? Have you done the work to get to the bottom of something only to end up depressed by the truth when you get there? When you realize just how wrong people are about something important, or even when you realize just how wrong you have been about something. Either one of those things can be depressing. Or maybe, for me, realizing just how resistant people are to finding out the truth. As you learn that, that can be rough. I've found that the more I consume the news, the more disheartened I can become. The future looks bleaker and bleaker. There's no great benefit from knowing these things. And if that's true, maybe it's better just to stick your head in the sand. Ignorance is bliss, they say. And if all we consider is what we see under the sun, maybe that's not such a bad conclusion to come to. But from here, let's take a look at pleasure for a moment and see if there's anything to be gained there. In chapter 2, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered that all my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, and a striving after wind. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. Of all the different things that we could learn from Solomon, this is perhaps the one that we're tempted to go ahead and try to find out for ourselves, isn't it? We might know that with more money, usually there are more problems. But we wouldn't mind finding out for ourselves, would we? We might know that sex, drugs, and rock and roll will ultimately disappoint us, but we think that for a time, maybe we could just pursue them just a little while, and then maybe we'll go on to something more important later. Well, none of us will ever have the ability to indulge in these pursuits to the degree that Solomon did. And the conclusion of his experience was that it was a vanity and a striving after the wind, and it did not profit him. But good experimentation should be repeatable, right? What if Solomon's experience was an outlier? Well, if you're worried about that, let's turn and look at Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was a wildly successful writer who had earned a lot of money through his writing, and with all that money, he was able to indulge in similar pursuits of pleasure to what Solomon was able to do. Yet at the end of his life, Oscar Wilde was in prison, broken and miserable. And at that time he wrote these words: "The gods had given me almost everything, but I let myself be lured into long spells of senseless and sensual ease. I amused myself with being a lounger, a dandy, a man of fashion. I surrounded myself with the smaller natures and the meaner minds. I became the spendthrift of my own genius, and to waste an eternal youth gave me a curious joy. Tired of being on the heights, I deliberately went to the depths in search for new sensation. What the paradox was to me in the sphere of thought, perversity became to me in the sphere of passion. Desire at the end was a malady or a madness or both. I grew careless of the lives of others. I took pleasure where it pleased me and passed on. I forgot that every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character, and that therefore what one has done in the secret chamber, one has someday to cry aloud on the housetop. I ceased to be lord over myself. I was no longer the captain of my soul and did not know it. I allowed pleasure to dominate me. I ended in horrible disgrace. There is only one thing for me now: absolute humility." Now, Oscar Wilde didn't come to the exact conclusion of Ecclesiastes that everything was vanity and a striving after the wind, but he did clearly recognize the futility of his pursuits. He said desire at the end was a malady or a madness or both. And he concluded with, "I ended in horrible disgrace. There's only one thing for me now: absolute humility." You see, we should learn from the mistakes of others because we won't live long enough to make them all ourselves. But as I think about this, maybe historical figures aren't the best examples for you to relate to. So let's consider something more modern. A few weeks ago, a catalog of toys came from Amazon, and it showed up at our house. So I gave Caleb a pen and told him he could go through and mark anything that he liked in there. I don't know if he'll get anything from the catalog, but he enjoyed looking at everything and telling me about the things that he liked in there. When he was done, he had marked over 100 toys. Now, let's imagine that Kayleen and I bought him every single one of those toys and gave them to him for Christmas. Does anyone here think that by this time next year he would still be satisfied with those 100 toys? Probably not. Do you think instead that he would be ready to look through another catalog and find more new toys? As much enjoyment and pleasure as he might get from some or all of those toys, that pleasure would be fleeting. It would be like a vapor, and it ultimately would leave him unsatisfied. And are any of us much different? As soon as we get everything we want, we will find that we want something new. No pleasure in this life will last. But the pursuit of pleasure is easy for many Christians to write off as vanity. Let's return then to the pursuit of wisdom. That sounds like something that Christians ought to pursue. That could be worthwhile. So from verse 12, so I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity and a striving after wind. We should try to be wise, right? We shouldn't just live as fools all of our lives, should we? There are whole books in the Bible devoted to wisdom, and we believe that God is wise, so we should be like him. So certainly we can't just write off wisdom as a meaningless pursuit, can we? I think the answer to that is both yes and no. Wisdom is better than folly. There is more gain in wisdom than in folly, just as there is more gain in light than in darkness. We should be wise. Even without regard for God, it is better to be wise than to be a fool. But even so, neither wisdom nor folly is a worthwhile pursuit on its own. Death waits for both the wise man and the fool, and ultimately, both will pass into obscurity, being utterly forgotten. For Solomon, who was exceedingly wise, he found this to be a dreadful discovery. All of his pursuit of wisdom was ultimately of no value to him. Sure, it was better than being a fool, but it fell short of providing any lasting meaning or control in his own life. So if pleasure and if wisdom aren't worthwhile pursuits, maybe we can find meaning in our work. Verse 18, he goes on to say, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. This one might hit close to home for some of us. Southwest North Dakota culture puts a high value on hard work and on toil. And yet, it's hard to deny the logic here. None of the profits that we work for in this life will ultimately be ours. All of them will be passed on to someone else. And this isn't the point that Ecclesiastes is making here, but haven't we all seen or heard examples of an inheritance tearing a family apart? But the point here is that we don't know, and we have really no control over how our profits will be managed after we die. We don't know if they will be handled wisely or foolishly. But we don't want to think about this, because when we do, we're likely to end up at the same place that we see in verse 23, that our days are full of sorrow and our work is a vexation. And maybe some of us have experienced this next sentence. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. And all of that goes to say that this also is vanity. So we're all probably pretty depressed by now. At least if you're paying attention, we're probably pretty depressed by now. And that's really the conclusion that most people who honestly consider these things are going to come to if they take a perspective like Ecclesiastes, ignoring God and eternity, but looking at the world under the sun. Apart from God, I think it's hard to be intellectually honest and come to any meaningful conclusion about the meaning of life or the ability of humanity to grasp any significant control over the world. I know that in my life, there are times when I think about life and meaning and purpose and influence and control. And I think about things like work and wisdom and pleasure, and I can't make sense of it all. And I get depressed. And if I allow myself to think about all of that without God in the picture, it becomes very easy for me to understand why someone might commit suicide. Without God, what is the point? That's why I began last week in our introduction by looking at the end of Ecclesiastes. And I'm going to go there again for a moment because I need that reminder in my life. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, with every secret thing, whether good or evil. There is meaning in this life, and it comes from God. He gives each of us a purpose, and our duty is to obey him. That is where we find fulfillment in this life. But we don't just need to go to the end of Ecclesiastes every time we get depressed in the middle of it. The end of chapter 2 also gives us perhaps a little more positive picture of life. From verse 24, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also, I saw, is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. We might be looking at the world under the sun, but even still, we can remember that God made this world. Even when we don't consider him and his involvement in it today, what God made is good. There is a goodness in his creation. There is a goodness in what we eat and drink. And when we receive those things as gifts from God, we can enjoy them. And there's goodness in our work and our toil. And again, if we see that as a gift from God, we should enjoy it. But we should never make those goodnesses our goal. We should only receive them as a gift from God. 1 Timothy 4:4 says, "For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving." And that's why, like last week, I want to encourage you to remember the words of 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18. "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you." When we do this, we will find enjoyment and pleasure and wisdom in this life. These things are gifts from God. But when we fail to remember God, we will all too often find ourselves depressed. Apart from God, nothing can satisfy. But with God, anything can satisfy. Or I like to say it this way. It can be a little confusing, but I think it sounds good too. Apart from God, nothing can satisfy. But with God, nothing can satisfy. Learn these lessons from Solomon. Don't let his mistakes go to waste. Learn from the mistakes of others, because you won't live long enough to make them yourself. Let me sum up these chapters in this way. There is goodness in this world, but don't set up goodness as your goal. Don't chase after wisdom or pleasure or work. Chase after God. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Because apart from God, nothing can satisfy, but with God, anything can satisfy. Let me pray for us this morning. God, we thank you for the goodness of your creation. We thank you that even though there are times when we can look at the world under the sun and we can see it as a wearisome toil with no meaning or purpose. We thank you that when we remember our place in your plan, that we can find purpose. We can find meaning in life. And we can enjoy the goodness that you have given as we go about this. We can enjoy the food and drink that you give us out of your good creation. And we can enjoy the work that you give us to work in this life as well. Help us to enjoy these things without making them our focus, but help us to keep our focus on you. Amen.
Our closing hymn today is number 691, Surely